The coffee mug slipped out of my father-in-law's hand the moment he saw me walk through that front door. It hit the kitchen tile and shattered. Ceramic pieces skidding across the floor in every direction. And not a single person in that room moved to clean it up. They were all too busy staring at me. "She's just a dental hygienist," he had told my husband 2 weeks before our wedding. I wasn't supposed to hear that. But walls in old colonial houses are thin, and I was standing on the other side of one, holding a casserole dish I'd made from scratch, listening to my future father-in-law explain to his son exactly why he was making a mistake. "My name is Laurel. I'm 31 years old. And for the first 6 years of my marriage, I let people in that family call me just something. Just a hygienist. Just a girl from Akron. Just someone who got lucky marrying into the Aldridge family. I want to tell you what happened the Sunday afternoon that mug hit the floor. But to understand it, you need to understand what the Aldridge family actually is, and what they were hiding. My husband's name is Patrick. We met in college at Ohio State. He was studying finance. I was pre-dental, which I eventually pivoted out of when the debt projections scared me straight into a dental hygiene program instead. Patrick thought that was practical. His father, Edwin Aldridge, thought it was a sign. Edwin had built a regional logistics company out of Columbus, Aldridge Transport Solutions. Over 30 years, 300 trucks, contracts with mid-size manufacturers across the Midwest. A net worth that his wife Constance referenced in casual conversation, the way other people mention the weather. They had a house in Dublin, Ohio, a condo in Scottsdale, and a habit of making every holiday dinner feel like a performance review. Patrick was the golden child. His younger brother, whose name I'll get to, was the disappointment. And I was, from day one, the wrong choice. I didn't grow up with money. My mom worked as a school secretary in Akron for 22 years. My dad drove for UPS until his knees gave out. We weren't poor. We had what we needed. But we didn't have the kind of money that earns you a seat at a table like Edwin's without someone quietly questioning how you got there. Patrick never saw me that way. That's the thing about him that I held on to for a long time. He never once made me feel like I was less. But his family had a way of doing it so subtly, so gracefully, that by the time you felt the sting, they'd already moved on to discussing the stock market. Constance once told me that my centerpiece arrangement at Christmas dinner was charming, in a homemade sort of way. Patrick's college girlfriend, a woman named Alicia whose LinkedIn I absolutely did not stalk for 2 years, had apparently hand-painted the china one year. The bar had been established before I arrived. For 6 years, I brought food to every gathering, remembered every birthday, sent thank you notes within 48 hours, and worked full-time at a dental practice in Westerville, seeing patients back-to-back 5 days a week. I made decent money. I was good at my job. I had a patient space that actually requested me specifically, which in that practice was rare. None of it mattered on the Aldridge family score sheet. Patrick's younger brother is named Garrett. He's 28, 4 years younger than Patrick, and he had been the family's running project since he dropped out of his MBA program at Ohio State 3 years into it. Edwin kept floating him money. Constance kept making excuses. Patrick kept his mouth shut because that's what Patrick did. He smoothed things over and hoped everyone would eventually calm down. Garrett married a woman named Simone about 18 months before that Sunday. Simone is stunning in the way that makes people forget to ask follow-up questions. She has the kind of confidence that reads as competence. And she had Edwin and Constance convinced within 3 months of meeting her that she was the missing piece the family had been waiting for. Simone worked in brand development. I put that in quotes because after a year and a half of asking polite questions at family dinners, I still had no clear picture of what she actually did. She had a business card that said principal consultant and an Instagram with 50,000 followers, and a habit of speaking in outcomes without ever describing process. She and I were never unfriendly, but she had a way of asking about my job that made it sound like a temporary situation. "Are you still doing the teeth thing?" she asked me once at Easter, not maliciously, just casually, the way you'd ask about a hobby someone picked up during lockdown. I smiled and said yes, I was still doing the teeth thing. What I didn't say, what I hadn't told anyone in that family including Patrick, was that 18 months earlier, I had quietly become a part owner of the practice where I worked. Dr. Kenneth Paulson had been my employer for 5 years. He was 63, and his wife had just been diagnosed with early-onset Parkinson's, and he wanted to reduce his hours without closing the practice he'd spent 30 years building. He came to me privately and asked if I'd be interested in a partnership arrangement. 40% ownership, phased over 3 years, with the option to buy the remaining 60 when he was ready to retire. I didn't have the capital, but I had a credit score of 810, a clean financial history, and a relationship with a small business lender in Columbus who looked at the practice's revenue. $1.4 million annually, growing, and said yes. I told Patrick that night. He was happy for me. He squeezed my hand and said he was proud of me and then asked what was for dinner, and I realized something sitting at our kitchen table. He didn't fully understand what I'd just told him. He heard co-owner of a dental office the way his family heard dental hygienist. It registered as a category, not a reality. I didn't correct him. I kept working. I kept going to family dinners. I kept being just Laurel. The Sunday everything changed started as a routine monthly dinner at Edwin and Constance's house in Dublin. I had made a sweet potato casserole. I brought it in my good dish, the Les Crises one Patrick had given me for my birthday. I walked through the front door into the kitchen where Edwin was standing with a mug of coffee, already holding court about something. I caught the tail end of, "And the trucking margins this quarter are," before he looked up and saw me. The mug hit the floor. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking there's an obvious reason for that. Some dramatic reveal, some moment of recognition. But in the actual moment, I had no idea. I just stood there holding my casserole dish while ceramic shards slid across the tile, thinking I should probably get the dustpan. Constance rushed over. Garrett appeared from the living room. Simone was right behind him, and she looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. Something between guilt and calculation. Patrick came in from the garage and said, "Babe, what happened?" And Edwin, 67 years old, founder of a 30-year company, said, "Nothing. I was startled." He didn't look at me again for the rest of the evening. I found out what happened 3 days later from an accidental email. I say accidental. Someone, I still don't know who, had forwarded an email chain from Edwin's personal account to a distribution list that included me. Probably because my email address contains Aldridge in it, after I added Patrick's last name professionally for the practice website. The email was between Edwin and a man named Whitmore, a name I didn't recognize, and it contained a PDF attachment. The PDF was a due diligence report on me. Edwin had hired someone to look into my background, not just a casual Google search, a proper paid investigation. The report had my employment history, my education, my parents' financial records, my credit history. It had a section on the practice, and that section was thorough. It listed the partnership agreement, the loan amount, the practice's revenue, a projected valuation based on current growth rate that over the next 5 years put the practice's worth somewhere between $2.8 and $3.4 million, of which my eventual 60% stake would represent the majority. Edwin had found out what I was actually worth, and from the email thread, it was clear that he had found out because Garrett needed money. I sat at my kitchen table for 2 hours reading that email chain. Patrick was at work. I read it 3 times to make sure I understood what I was looking at. Garrett, it turned out, had debts that Edwin either didn't know the full extent of, or had known about and chosen to ignore for too long. The MBA dropout had spent the better part of 3 years making what the email euphemistically called high-risk investment decisions, which, reading between the lines, meant he had lost somewhere in the range of $280,000 in a combination of bad crypto positions, an investment in a franchise concept that collapsed, and a personal loan to a friend that never came back. Simone knew. The email made that clear. She and Garrett had apparently gone to Edwin 6 weeks earlier and laid it out. Edwin was furious. The email had the controlled, clipped language of a man who was extremely angry and trying to sound businesslike about it. But here was the piece that made me set my phone down and stare at the wall. Edwin's proposed solution was not to simply bail Garrett out again. Edwin had looked at all the assets connected to the Aldridge family, including his son's households. and he had landed on the practice partnership as a potential collateral source. He wanted to know if my stake could be leveraged, whether a family loan structure could be built around it, whether, if he put pressure on Patrick could influence me to sign something that would give the family a claim on the practice's future value. He had hired Whitmore to research me before saying a word to Patrick or to me, and the due diligence report had come back in a way he clearly hadn't expected. I wasn't just anything. I did not tell Patrick immediately. I know that probably sounds wrong, but I needed to think clearly, and I knew that if I handed Patrick that email, his first instinct would be to call his father and talk it through, and I needed that conversation to happen on my terms, not Edwin's. I called my business attorney. I have a business attorney now, which is one of those sentences that still feels strange to say out loud. Her name is Beverly, and she is 60 years old, and has handled small business transactions in Columbus for 3 decades, and has a zero-tolerance policy for what she calls amateur family interference. Beverly read the email. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Laurel, this man had you investigated without your knowledge and is discussing using your business assets as leverage without disclosing his son's debt situation to you. I want you to do nothing for 2 weeks. Don't respond to the email. Don't tell Patrick. Come to my office Thursday." I went Thursday. Beverly had already done her own research, and what she found was that Edwin's situation was considerably more complicated than a son with gambling debts. Aldridge Transport Solutions had been under informal review by the Ohio Department of Transportation for approximately 8 months. One of Edwin's subcontractors had been flagged for falsified weight compliance records. Trucks running heavier than licensed, which is a federal safety issue. The question Beverly's contact had surfaced was whether Edwin knew. There was also the matter of a line of credit Edwin had taken against the company 18 months ago. $400,000. That appeared, based on public filing discrepancies, to have been partially allocated in ways that didn't match the stated business purpose. Edwin wasn't just trying to solve Garrett's problem. Edwin had his own problems. And in trying to quietly assess the Aldridge family's assets, he had stumbled onto mine, and realized that his daughter-in-law, the dental hygienist he had dismissed for 6 years, was sitting on something that was actually worth protecting, which meant I had leverage he didn't know I knew about. Beverly's advice was precise. Don't move first. Document everything. Let him come to you. He came to me on a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks after the mug incident. He showed up at our house while Patrick was still at work. He rang the doorbell, which he never did. Edwin Aldridge walked into his son's house like it was an extension of his own property. The fact that he rang the bell told me he was nervous. I opened the door. I did not invite him in immediately. I waited. He cleared his throat and said he wanted to talk. He wanted to discuss, as he put it, a family opportunity. I let him in. I offered him water. I sat across from him at my kitchen table, the same table where I had read that email, and I listened to him explain, in the careful language of a man who thinks he's the smartest person in the room, that he had been thinking about ways to strengthen the family's financial position, and that he believed my practice might be a good fit for a family investment structure. He did not mention the due diligence report. He did not mention Garrett's debts. He framed the entire thing as an opportunity he was generously offering me. I let him finish. I took a sip of my water. Then I told him I appreciated him coming over and that I had some questions. I asked him whether the family investment structure he was describing had anything to do with Garrett's outstanding debt load, which I understood to be approximately $280,000. The color drained from his face the same way it had when I walked through his kitchen door 3 weeks earlier. I asked him whether he was aware that the informal ODOT review of his subcontractor had expanded in scope in the past 2 weeks. Beverly had confirmed this through a public records request. I asked him whether the $400,000 line of credit he had drawn against the company had been fully documented in the manner required by his existing lender agreement. Edwin Aldridge sat at my kitchen table and did not say a single word for approximately 45 seconds. I counted. Then he said quietly, "How do you know about any of that?" I said, "Because I'm not just a dental hygienist, Edwin. I called Patrick that night and asked him to come home early. I sat him down and told him everything. The email, Beverly, the ODOT situation, what his father had come to ask me. I showed him the forwarded email chain. Patrick is a good man. That's the complicated part of this story that I want to be honest about. He sat at that table and read through everything, and I watched his face cycle through about 6 different emotions, and at the end of it he put his head in his hands for a long moment. Then he looked up and said, "I'm so sorry. Not my father wouldn't do that. Not there must be some explanation." He just apologized. Which I think is why I'm still married to him. We agreed together on the next steps. Patrick called his father and told him that Laurel's practice was not a family asset and was not available for any restructuring, investment, or collateral arrangement of any kind. He said it plainly. Edwin pushed back. Patrick held the line. 3 weeks later, Edwin retained an attorney of his own. Not for us, but for the ODOT situation, which had formally escalated into a compliance investigation. The subcontractor issue had expanded. The financial discrepancies in the line of credit were now being reviewed by the lender. Garrett and Simone's financial situation became, by necessity, something Edwin could no longer quietly manage. The family had a meeting, one I was not invited to and did not try to attend. Patrick told me afterward that it had been, in his words, "Rue." Constance called me 2 weeks later. It was a Sunday morning. She asked if she could come over for coffee. She sat at my kitchen table. Everyone comes to my kitchen table, apparently. And she was quiet for a few minutes. Then she said, "I owe you an apology. I think I knew what Edwin was planning and I should have warned you." I asked her why she hadn't. She said, "Because I thought Patrick had made a mistake marrying you. And I suppose I didn't mind if you got squeezed a little." I don't think I've ever admired someone's honesty more while simultaneously needing to take a very slow breath before responding. I told her I appreciated her saying it. She asked if we could start over. I said I was willing to try. The ODOT investigation concluded 7 months after that kitchen visit. Edwin's company was fined $340,000 for the subcontractor violations. The weight compliance falsifications had been ongoing for at least 2 years, and 2 of Edwin's operational managers had known. Whether Edwin personally knew remains, officially, unresolved. Unofficially, Beverly has an opinion about that, and she expressed it to me over lunch once with a raised eyebrow and nothing more. Edwin settled the lender dispute over the line of credit by repaying the amount in question with interest and agreeing to a revised oversight structure on the company's borrowing. No criminal referral. He was, in the end, lucky, in the way that men like Edwin Aldridge tend to be lucky. Garrett and Simone separated 8 months after the family meeting. She relocated to Atlanta. He moved back into Edwin and Constance's house in Dublin, which I'm told he is not enjoying. The practice crossed $1.6 million in annual revenue last fiscal year. Dr. Paulson reduced to 2 days a week in January. My ownership stake hit 55% in February ahead of schedule. Patrick got a promotion at his firm in the spring. We bought a house in Bexley. Nothing like Edwin's house in Dublin, but ours, with a backyard and a kitchen big enough for a table that fits 6. I hosted Thanksgiving this year. Constance brought wine and actually helped set the table without commenting on anything. Edwin sat across from me and ate 2 helpings of the sweet potato casserole I made from scratch. He didn't say much, but at the end of the night, when he was putting on his coat in the entryway, he paused and looked at me and said, "Good dinner, Laurel. Not just anything. Just, good dinner, Laurel." I said thank you. I closed the door behind him. I said thank you. I stood in my kitchen, in my house, and I thought about a mug hitting tile and ceramic pieces scattering, and how sometimes the thing that breaks open is exactly what needed to break. Then I went and did the dishes.